So this is part of my Excel 102 series. In this video, we're going to talk about keyboard shortcuts for large data sets. So I strongly recommend that you use the free Excel workbook at divideandconquermath.com to work alongside me. So in this series, I have these 4 topics. So in the last video, I talked about basic stats formulas. And we had a small data set. So now I'm going to talk about using those same formulas, but for extremely large data sets and just how you can get through those more easily. I also talk about creating graphs and frequency and histograms in other videos in this series. So let's get to it. Okay, so for this set of problems, I'm in my workbook and I'm on the keyboard shortcuts page, so you can look at the tabs down here. Okay, so we're going to do very similar to what we did in the previous tab. We need to sum all of the data. But as I use the sum formula, what you're going to notice here is if I try to select all of this data, as you can see, I really can't get to the bottom of it. And so the reason for that is that there are 25,000 data points in this set. And so look at all the formulas that I'm asking you to run here. So you might think, oh, I can just sum and wait to get through these 25,000 data points. But the thing is, to do this repetitively for all these different formulas, it's going to get very old very quick. So we need keyboard shortcuts to help us out with this. So the keyboard shortcut in general that will get you to the end of a set of data quickly, I'll just show it to you first. So you click on the cell where you're starting, you hit Control Shift and then the down arrow, and that will take you to the very end of the data. Now, my data is indexed, so I can see here that this is the 25,000th data point here at the end. So this is a way that we can use to kind of get through large data sets more quickly. It's really important in Excel that you know certain keyboard shortcuts. And now that I'm at the bottom, I also don't have to sit here and scroll back up. So you can see I'm scrolling up here. Instead, what I can do is I can hit Control Home and it takes me back to cell A1 in a sheet. So these are 2 super handy shortcuts to know. So let's now use it in a formula. So I'm going to use this sum formula, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on where my height data starts here, and then I'm going to hit Control Shift down, and that is for a Windows computer. I'll put up the equivalent formula on the screen for Mac. But now you can see that I've got all of the data selected, and I didn't have to sit there and like scroll through it mindlessly. So this is a really great shortcut to use, and we can use it over and over again. So if I want to do this for the average, so again, I can just click on the data, Control Shift down, and then close it. So again, maybe I'll write it here. So it's the Control Shift and the down arrow, and that's for Windows. Okay, so again, to find the median, so I can just Control Shift down with this data, hit close. To find the minimum, so I can do the min function, Control Shift down. I can do the same thing for the max function. So I can start here, Control Shift down. And then for the standard deviation, so it's std ev.s. So remember, standard deviation, we usually assume it's a sample, so you always use the .s function. And so now you can see that I've gotten through all of these formulas with my 25,000 data points pretty quickly. So just to remind you though, so if for some reason you need to be at the bottom of the data set or you're somewhere else in your Excel workbook, so just one more reminder of this, so you can always hit Control Home and then that will take you back to cell A1. So those are super important keyboard shortcuts to know. Okay, so we're in the keyboard shortcuts tab right here, which is the second tab in this workbook. And now I have 2 data sets, and actually I'm going to show you your first shortcut here. So as you can see, height is in inches, but inches is cut off. So if you ever want Excel to just automatically set the height so that you don't like have the cutoff like this, what you can do is you can look for these little black arrows right here next to the column, double click, and then it will just auto adjust the column. So I can do that for both of these to start. So that's really handy sometimes if your column is being cut off. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to find sums, averages, medians, all this good stuff here for the height and weight data. And let's make this look pretty. So let's go ahead and center all of this just to make it nicer to look at. You want to always make your data look nice, even if it's not something that you have to turn in. It's just good to get in the habit of. So let's talk about summing the height data and kind of why we need keyboard shortcuts. So here for my height, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here, and then I can go ahead and start dragging down, but very quickly you're going to see what the problem is. This is an enormous data set. You see how it just keeps going for forever? So this is one of those cases where dragging actually is a pretty inefficient way to use Excel. So what we're going to use is a keyboard shortcut, and I have all the keyboard shortcuts. I have them referenced over here, just so that you know. Okay, so the keyboard shortcut that we're going to use first for the height. Okay, so I click where I want this to start, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control Shift and the down arrow. And this is for Windows, so I'll pop up the equivalent formula on the screen, but just FYI, if you have a Mac or a different computer, you might have to Google what is the equivalent of this, because this is a really important shortcut. So now you can see how many data points there are. There were 25,000 data points. That is a lot. And that's going to take you a very long time to scroll all the way down to, so we don't want to do that, right? Especially since I have to run all these different formulas, I'm going to have to run them over and over, and it's a lot faster if I have that keyboard shortcut. So if I want to find the average of this data, so it's the same thing. I click on where my height data starts, I hit Control Shift down, I hit Enter. Same thing for my median data, so I can go to the median, and then I can hit Start here, Control Shift down. It just keeps picking everything up. And so we can continue this for the minimum and for the maximum. And this is a standard deviation formula, so we always want to use the .s formula because we don't know if this is population data, so we always just assume it's the sample. So here's my data for the height, the different stats, I guess, for the height data. So I have left here blank for you to practice finding the weight data. So what I would recommend is that you pause the video here, repeat all these formulas using this Control Shift down command just to give yourself a moment to practice it and make sure you've got it, and then hit play when you're ready. So I have not filled in my weight data because I'm actually going to do these formulas in a different way. So I wanted you to practice this skill, but we're going to talk about some other keyboard shortcuts now. So there are two things that I kind of notice here. So one, the weight data is one column over. And so if you watch the Excel 101 series, I talked about like dragging formulas and things like that. So we can actually think a little bit more strategically on how to replicate these formulas. The other thing that I want to check is I just want to double check that the weight data ends at the same spot as the height data. So I'm going to click on the weight data. I'm going to go Control Shift down. And now I can see that, yeah, this data ends in the exact same spot. Okay. So from here, now what I'm going to do is I need to go back up to the top of the sheet. And so you actually don't have to sit here and like scroll all the way back up. There is a keyboard shortcut to get us back up to the top. So we can hit Control Home. That just, boom, takes us up to the top of the sheet. So that's a really handy one to know. So there are a couple ways on how I can get the weight formulas. So one way would be that I can copy and paste these over to the weight formulas. And so I have also here two other very vital commands that you need to know for Excel, copy and paste. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these formulas, and I'm going to hit Control C, and then I'm going to click on the weight, and I'm going to hit Control V. And so first of all, notice that in hitting Control V, it shows me these little paste options. Now, depending on your version of Excel, you might not have that, but if this pops up, you can just see that there are different ways on how we could have pasted this. So for instance, I could have just pasted the formulas, and if I just pasted the formulas, that means that I don't want to transfer the color over. So if you have this little box, that's one way to do that. Another way on how you can access those options is if you come up here to where it says paste, you can go through, and again, you can just select formulas here. So this is a little bit of there's like subtle differences with like how you paste and whether it matters or not. So if I just want to copy the formulas and I don't care about the color, I can just hit Control C and then Control V and be done with it. If I want to maintain the color, then I either need to go through and I need to change the boxes, or I need to play with the paste settings. So these are just tiny little things to think about when you're working with this. Okay, so anyways, so I Control C and then Control V the data. And now if I click on these formulas, so this is what we talked about in the Excel 101 video. So we're going to kind of keep repeating this over and over. So all of that data moved over one spot, and that's how it works, right? So when you just copy formulas, they will move. And so since this data is the weight is one column over, in copying a formula one column over, it's just going to move one column over. So hopefully these are the values that you found when you entered in your own formulas. One other way that we could have done this is we also could have just copied all these formulas here, gone to the little green box and dragged over. It's all the same thing. There's multiple ways to do it. It just kind of depends on your workflow and what you're doing as to which way you want to use it. So we've now talked about the moving down a data set, copy, paste, how to get back to the A1. So the last thing I want to do is I want to talk about how to add a sum at the bottom of the height and weight data. And so this is a little tricky, but what we're going to do is we need to go to the bottom of this data, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go Shift Control down to the bottom. So now I'm here. So this is where I want to make my sum. So I'm going to just add a little label that says sum right here, just so I don't forget what this is. And then I'm going to use the sum formula. And so the thing about some of these keyboard shortcuts is they're also versatile. So I can start with the last value here, and then I can go Control Shift up. Now there is a problem in doing the Control Shift up in this case because it also grabbed this title. So if you want to exclude certain values out of your sum, what you can do is, so while it's still open like it is here, so you can see the formula has not been closed, right? I can hit the Shift button, and then I can just click where I wanted that sum to end. So I wanted the sum to end here at the last number. And now I can go ahead and hit Enter, and now it's summing everything up. And so, of course, now if I wanted, I could just drag this over. That gets me this other sum. I can see it going all the way up. We're all good here. And now that I'm at the bottom of this, if I want to go back up to A1, I can hit Control Home. And so those are some really handy keyboard shortcuts. The last thing that I want to show you that will come up from time to time, so I'll probably have to mention this in a few videos, but the last thing that I want to show you is actually like how you can move where Excel is kind of referencing your cells. So watch this. I go Control Shift down. Okay, so this has collected all the possible cells in this column. And if I wanted to arrow over, look what it does. So I arrowed over one to the right, and it brought me one to the right at the very top of the data. So one other thing just to note about Excel is that where that reference happens, you can actually manipulate it. So if I go back to Control Shift down, so what I can do is I can hit Shift Tab, and now watch what happened. This cell down here got highlighted white. So now if I arrow over to the right, now it will select that cell. And so that can be just handy to know how to kind of move through a data set. So I'll show you that one more time. So I start here, I go Control Shift down, and then I hit Shift Tab, and now it just highlights that bottom cell here. So if I want to move now to the left or to the right of the data set, it will start from that point instead. So I'll hit Control Home one more time. So I have all of these keyboard commands referenced over here, just so that you can see that. And otherwise, that brings us to the end of this one. So next in the series, I will talk about creating graphs and frequency and histograms, so you can see everything that I cover in this series. If you found this helpful, I'd love it if you hit that like button, leave me a comment, or subscribe. And otherwise, I'm going to leave it at that, guys. I'll talk to you in another video.